Hey Stix.
Hey.
What gacha games do you currently play
Oh, man.
in 2024?
Like, where do I even begin?
You know what, actually, maybe you could do a video covering it.
Yeah, that
You know what?
I feel like that'd be a really fun idea.
I just might do that. I often get asked, hey Stix, what gacha games do you currently play in 2024? And I thought to myself, you know what? I would take a minute today, sit down, and discuss them with all of you. I've played a lot of gacha games over the course of this channel's life. I actually only started playing gacha games roughly about 2 years ago. I started the Stix channel, I think, the first few months of 2022. I have an MMO channel, and I was kind of growing bored with MMOs. Gacha games were giving me something new, and they allowed for me to dedicate time to them and enjoy them without necessarily needing to invest hundreds or thousands of hours into them to be competitive. They provided me with fun gameplay loops, at times good stories, good dubs, and there was something I could play for 30 minutes a day, or 30 minutes a week, or 5 hours a day if I felt the need to. Yet after having played probably well over 80 of them over the course of the last year and a half, I've narrowed down roughly 9 gacha games that I play on a regular basis. At least 6 of these games are games that I log into every single week, and every single day for that matter. These are gacha games that I think excel and are better in almost every regard than any other gacha game that is not listed here. Now, that isn't to say that other gacha games aren't good. That isn't to say these are necessarily more or less popular than other gacha games, but they are the games that I enjoy the most and genuinely play every single week. Let's begin this by talking about NIKKE, which right now is my #1 most played gacha game. I don't really need to say why that is. This is a very plot-heavy game with arguably some of the greatest looking well, I mean, there are no husbandos in this game that are playable anyway. There are a few in-game that are very good looking, but recruitable waifus are the main form of characters that you obtain in the game. They are absolutely phenomenal looking. They are perfectly proportional. The game itself is, for I would say, the first half, maybe 2/3 of the game, very idle. It doesn't really require you to necessarily play much of it, but as you continue to push further through it, like I'm in chapter 21 or 22 right now, and you do need to play it. There are various game modes that you do need to aim for, that you do need to actually be present physically for, because your characters, the AI will not utilize effectively, and you will not be able to progress through. The game has a phenomenal story, like a story that is significantly better than I'd ever anticipated it being. Like, everyone I know went into NIKKE thinking, I know what kind of game this is gonna be, and every single one of them ended up thinking, or telling me, wow, the story is actually so much better than I ever thought it'd be. And that's true, because it came out of left field and surprised all of us that it was more than just a booba and booty game. Now, that isn't to say that, it excels in those areas too. It does, but, I'm saying. Now, fantastic voice acting. There isn't a world to explore, but it does have a great story. It does have a lot of content, very regular updates, and it is also one of the highest grossing gacha games month after month. Top 10, never dipping below. I think the current lowest point is at like $13 or $15 million, which is like several times more popular than almost any other gacha game out there, and makes roughly 15 to 30 times more than Tower Fantasy makes. Additionally, its soundtrack is mind-blowingly good. Speaking of soundtracks that are good, Punishing Gray Raven. Dude, the music in Punishing Gray Raven just perfectly complements everything. Punishing Gray Raven is an action RPG. Now, I know I'm going to upset some people by saying this, but I don't think that Punishing Gray Raven necessarily has as good a story as NIKKE does. That isn't to say Punishing Gray Raven's story is bad, it's just that it's not as good. Now, Punishing Gray Raven still has a decent story. It has the best action combat in the genre. You can't contest that. Anyone that says any other game has better combat is lying, or has really bad taste in action games. Now, Punishing Gray Raven excels in its combat. Good dub. It has really, really fun combat, a lot of events. Admittedly, it doesn't earn very much. It makes, I think, like 1/20th of what NIKKE makes on average, which is shocking given the character models in Punishing Graven are absolutely incredible looking. But I guess it also might be due to the fact that, well, Punishing Graven just doesn't have the same, like, aesthetic appeal in terms of characters. It does have some great looking husbandos and waifus. It's just, I don't think it's necessarily on the same level. But besides that, Punishing Graven is just all around a really fun game. It's also much more free-to-play friendly than almost any other gacha game out there. Speaking of very free-to-play friendly gacha games, Azur Lane is one of, if not the most free-to-play friendly gacha game online. I literally obtained every single character that I wanted without investing a single cent into the game. I have obtained everything I wanted. I have done everything I wanted. Azur Lane is by far the free-to-play friendliest gacha game ever made. It has characters that could technically be considered as voluptuous and as explicit and as lewd as NIKKE. Maybe at times a little bit more. You should check out their Twitter. Like, you will not be disappointed. Its gameplay isn't as fun, I don't think. Like, yeah, it is a kind of idle gameplay. Like, you can move your characters up and down, you can move them like vertically, horizontally, but at the same time, there isn't really much for you to actually do in terms of gameplay. It has a very unique style of gameplay, and so that you move across a grid-based battlefield. It has a decent story as well. I feel like a recurring theme in gacha games is that the stories are typically pretty bad. Azur Lane's isn't bad. I just feel like it's a little bit convoluted at times. Not nearly as convoluted as a couple other games in this list, but I mean, it's still worth noting. A game with arguably the most convoluted storyline in this list, and I know this is gonna upset some people, but is Arknights. Arknights has a really good story. It actually genuinely does. It just doesn't need to be as long as it is. You could condense this story down by like 80%, and it would make just as much sense. The characters would be just as fleshed out. It's crazy how much they just stretch this out and how much they drag the story on to accomplish and convey the same thing that they could have done in significantly less time. But in spite of the convoluted story and the dragged out stretch story, it is still very good. The characters are very good. They're very deep. They're very well thought out. The character models themselves all look really, really good. They're not necessarily as explicit as some of the other games listed here. The combat, the gameplay overall, is a tower defense kind of tactical strategy game. It's not going to appeal to everyone, but I really, really love strategy games. The dubbing is really well done. It's playable mostly in Japanese and English. It also has Korean and Chinese, but I'm a fan of the English and the Japanese dubs both. This game typically falls in the top 20 to top 30 highest grossing gacha games, so it is very popular. It's updated all the time and is probably the only gacha game that I've been playing since I started this channel, which is kind of surprising for me to say because I have not missed logging in a single day, and I have obtained every single banner character that has been present. Admittedly, I may have spent money on those monthly headhunter packs, which is I think like $50 a month to make sure you get the Originum and the free 10 roll, and that has essentially allowed for me to obtain every limited banner character that's been available. I think I still have like probably 50 10 pulls worth of currency left. Okay, I've spent admittedly way too much money on Arknights, but still I've spent more money on NIKKE in the last 4 months of playing it than I have on Arknights in like 2 years of playing it. Now, before we talk about any additional games, I want to take a moment here to thank our incredible patrons over on Patreon who allow for me to continue to do dedicated videos like this every single day. You guys are phenomenal, and I cannot express how much I appreciate all your guys' support. Now, let's continue. Blue Archive is another game I've spent a quite egregious amount of money on. Even though Blue Archive is pretty free-to-play friendly, the game, I like, whenever I talk about this, people are like, but they're chibi characters. And like, I get it, chibi characters aren't necessarily going to appeal to everyone. That's perfectly fine. I'm a fan of both fully 3D characters and also chibi characters. It really doesn't bother me as long as the storyline's good, as long as the gameplay is difficult. I am perfectly happy. Blue Archive is very much like NIKKE. It is an autoplay game for like the first half of the game, and then after that, if you're not actively utilizing your abilities yourself, you will fail. it gets really difficult. And the boss encounters, the total assault, the new grand assault, like there's so many aspects of this game that require your active participation. Because if you're not actively playing the game in those more difficult encounters, then you'll lose. The AI is just, it's a little bit handicapped. It will use heals on your characters and use your resource points when your characters are full health. And then you'll run out of time and you won't be able to finish the level and the encounter because you didn't deal enough damage, purely because you utilized your resource points to heal a fully healed team. Now, the story in Blue Archive is actually very well done. I think it's really good. I think the gameplay is actually very fun once you get to a point where you can actually physically play the game. I think the character models all look really good. I think there are a lot of features in the game, a lot of game modes that kind of leave me with at least 15 to 20 minutes worth of gameplay to play every single day. That's if I choose not to continue pushing through the missions, the chapters. Now, it is fairly free-to-play friendly because it only costs like 1,200 gems for a 10 pull, which is significantly cheaper than in a lot of gacha games. It also earns a boatload of money, like top 5 to top 10 every single month. Something that never falls in the top 5, the top 10, the top 20, or probably the top 50 is Guardian Tales. But at the same time, this is a really, really fun game that I've genuinely never played another gacha game like this. The gameplay loop involves you deploying several characters out onto a mission. These characters are all very unique. The graphical style is admittedly chibi, so it's gonna turn some people away, and you fully control your character. It is complete action combat, very fast, very fluid, very comical. The game itself doesn't take itself seriously. It has a lot of Easter eggs, a lot of references to other games. Like, there is a moment where you actually encounter Link from Zelda, and you shatter the Master Sword, and you give him a laser rifle that he goes back to Hyrule with. There are just some absolutely ridiculous things that happen in this game. It is so good. Now, it isn't necessarily free-to-play friendly. It also isn't for everyone. But at the same time, it gives you a lot of control, a lot of freedom over how you play the game. There's a lot of diversity in terms of characters, and the story is arguably one of the best that I have ever played. Another game that has an exceptional story, Reverse 1999. I've been hyping this game up for God knows how long, and when it finally launched, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe how good this game was. It has one of the best English dubs of a gacha game, period. Has one of the greatest stories of a gacha game, period. Now, it does have turn-based combat, so not everyone is going to be a fan of the turn-based combat style. The character models are really good. They're not explicit, they're not voluptuous, they're not shapely, or it is a very like PG-13 style game in terms of character models, but the story is something else altogether. Now, this game has continued to make a couple $1 million every single month, and is generally considered to be a relative success since it launched. I have been playing it every single week. I have been playing it every single month. I have worked with the developers on sponsored content for this because they're open, they're easy to work with, and they've just let me do and say whatever I want. This is a game that I would strongly urge everyone to play at least once. Out of every game in this list, if you play one, it should be this one. This isn't the best gacha game here, but it is a gacha game that you definitely need to try. Another gacha game you need to try is Echocalypse. This actually just launched a couple weeks ago, and I did a couple different dedicated videos on it because the characters in this game are absolutely out of this world. Like, I don't know how they got, I think they have a PG-13 rating. I don't know how they got a PG-13 rating. They are even more explicit than the character models in Azur Lane and NIKKE, which is saying something because those games have about as explicit character models as you'll encounter. Now, this game is an auto battler, so you deploy several units. They kind of just like go back and forth attacking one another. You don't really control them. You can control certain aspects of the battle, and you will need to as the game goes on, because once again, the AI in gacha games seems to be lacking, for a lack of a better way to phrase this. I feel like Typically in gacha games, the first half of the game can be played with the AI controlling it, but after that, you really have to pay attention to what's going on. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make efficient progress. Now, again, the character models, like, top tier. There admittedly isn't as much to do in this game as I'd like, but the game did just launch, so that it kind of makes sense. The story is unfortunately really bad. I would skip the story, but I mean, in, you know, some cases, skipping of the story is acceptable. An instance where skipping the story is not acceptable, Path to Nowhere, which is the last gacha game in this list that I still genuinely play. This game is like Arknights, if Arknights were dark, if it were gritty, if it were more voice acted. This is a game that is often compared to Arknights. And I genuinely think Path to Nowhere is almost as fun as Arknights is. I think if the graphical style were better, I would find more enjoyment from it, but I've always just been a little bit turned away from how the game looks compared to Arknights. I don't know, there's just something about it that it just doesn't really like appeal to me as much, and that's perfectly fine because, you know, there are games in this list that look worse than other games. Like I think Punishing Gray Raven and NIKKE look better than Guardian Tales and Azur Lane. Now, Path to Nowhere is a strategy tower defense game with a phenomenal story. I know there are a couple gacha games in here that I've said the stories of are really exceptional, and this is one of those games. This is a game where you cannot skip the story because it will have an impact on you. Now, unfortunately, Path to Nowhere only makes about $500,000, $1 million a month, so it's not a top earner, but that doesn't make it any less of a fun, entertaining, or engaging game. The character models, they all look really, really good. They look much more mature than normal. They're also toned down a lot when compared to probably half the list of games in this video. Now, those are the gacha games that I play every single day, or at the very least, every single week, that I make sure to log into so I don't miss anything. These are gacha games that I genuinely enjoy, that I have fun in, and that I think are some of what the gacha genre, some of the best of what the gacha genre has to offer us as players. I'm genuinely curious what games you guys play, what you believe to be like the top 5, top 10 games that you log into every day, or at least every week. If you want to let me know, you can do so in the comment section below. Otherwise, if you're not interested in any of these games, I got you covered with 2 different videos on screen right now that might be more interest to you.